This is the lecture picking up where we left off Friday, the 21st of January. This is the lecture that will be in the position of Tuesday's lecture. That is Tuesday, January 25th. And so we're having a lab on Tuesday, January 25th, but again, I'm not comfortable putting 15 people in a room and me talking and projecting for an hour or so. So this is the substitute for that. You need to watch this before lecture on the 26th of January. On the 26th of January, we will meet again on Google Meet, just like we did on Friday the 21st. And we will continue lectures live on Google Meet at least through this coming Friday, the 28th of January, the last Friday in January. Well, on the screen right now is the slide where we ended on Friday, the 21st. Here we were looking at all sorts of terms and asking the question which apply to science and which ones might apply to theology. And what we said was that none of these first four apply to science, but the science certainly involves itself with evidence. We have degrees of confidence, and yet whatever we come to, whatever conclusions we come to, must always, without exception, must retain tentativeness. We simply never get done. We never finish. There's always a status of, okay, well, what do we know right now? And that means that scientific knowledge changes perhaps greatly, like our immune system, over the last 50 years. That means that what was true perhaps for someone who got educated 30 years ago may not be true today, and thus scientists simply need to keep up in their fields. So we begin here for the lecture on Tuesday, the 25th of January. Continuing this thought, continuing this process, so kind of hammering home those points. Why do babies look like their parents? Okay. Why doesn't a cow give birth to kittens? The answers are going to involve genetics. That's from the scientific perspective. But you could have a supernatural explanation. It could be simply that God made it that way. I don't know if you find such answers satisfying. They don't seem to make predictions about how things will behave in the future, and they don't provide mechanisms. But if you did get that answer, God made it that way, you might wonder then, how did God do it? And someone could say God works in mysterious ways. And so you have to ask yourself, are those two acceptable responses to big biological questions like, why do babies look like their parents? And why doesn't a cow give birth to kittens? Well, dear, God made it that way. And God works in mysterious ways. We in science don't accept that. Science looks, as it says, for the natural explanations. And those are the three biggies right there: consistent, testable, and falsifiable. We have to have a consistent explanation if we're talking about the same phenomenon. So why doesn't a cow give birth to kittens is the same answer as to why don't salamanders give birth to frogs or have eggs that hatch into frogs. By the way, some salamanders do give birth. Live little babies come out, the cloaca. And we'll learn what a cloaca is later on in the semester. So science, we want natural explanations, consistent, testable, falsifiable, that help us to understand how our natural world works and make predictions then. Predictions such as, if you were to eat a battery, if you were to swallow a battery, even chew it up, we now can predict that would have horrible, perhaps life-threatening consequences to you, to eat a battery. Well, why? Well, because we understand the chemistry of batteries and some of the electrical properties of batteries, and we understand what your digestive tract looks like. And we don't think those things are compatible. We think that that would be very much upsetting to your digestive system. Okay? That's because we understand the human body. We understand how bodies work. and we can make predictions about what will happen when you do something to a human body. Now, we talked about other we should talk about other kinds of ideas in science, and this was on the pretest, and many of you did very well on this, so that's good to understand. First of all, we're learning. We're as a class, we're learning, and I want to hear what you think. I'm not sure that those initial ideas are opinions. They're just a thought. You're not anchored to it. You're not defending it. You're not voting based on this. You're just saying, well, right now, when I look at whatever phenomenon we're considering this semester, could it be this or that? And you'll ask questions and wonder, might this be a factor? We're going to have a lot of fun later on in the semester looking at animal coloration and the consequences of so many different types of color patterns. So I clearly want you, as I'm saying right here, I clearly want you to express your opinions about anything we discuss, and feel free to be very open. The kind of opinion I'm talking about, so what on earth is this all about, is about you standing up at a scientific meeting or you writing an opinion in a scientific paper in a publication, and you don't know anything that you're talking about. So in science, we will challenge you. And if you don't like being challenged, well, why would you say that, Sarah? So you were at a scientific meeting, someone named Sarah expresses an opinion, and someone else stands up and says, but wait a minute, why do you think that? And they darn well better have a scientific basis for their opinion. Well, they could say there's been these studies, or I've performed this research, and that's the kind of science that leads me to have the opinions that I have right now. But if this person named Sarah responded, well, I don't have to answer that. I have a right to an opinion. Well, first of all, that would be really unpleasant. And second, inappropriate. Because the audience would be thinking, this person named Sarah doesn't seem to understand the process of science. Okay. You just don't get to hold opinions. Now, there are all sorts of things that we hold opinions about, personal opinions, that really aren't all that scientifically based. I'm not sure that we reason through them scientifically. What do you think is the best album that you've ever heard of music? What do you think is the best tasting dessert? What, if any, meats do you really, really like? And what's the best way to prepare it? Those are experiences that we've had and lead us to have biases, and we tend to prefer things. That's not what we're talking about here. More really, really important things. And this on the pretest, I can tell you that you folks didn't do all that well. So this is a chance for you to learn. And it's perfectly fine not to know something before this class that we're talking about. It's this class that's an opportunity for you to learn. And so the pretest tells me I should make sure that I spend enough time on this to be very, very clear. Fact, hypothesis, law, and theory. These are terms that have clear definitions. Clear definitions, at least in science. Now, one of the problems we have whenever anybody tells us something is it's a bit of according to who or based on what. So if you think that these terms have definitions, where you should fold your arms and say, where, Dr. Zelisko, do you go to get a definition of a fact, a hypothesis, a law, or a theory? And that would be an outstanding question. Because this isn't just what I think, and it isn't what I think. I'm sharing what I learned. And here's the answer. The National Academy of Sciences is about 2,000 scientists, about 2,000 people who are scientists in the United States. Interestingly, about 3 are Blackburn graduates, which is way overrepresented. If there are 2,000, guys, there are more than 2,000 colleges and universities in the United States, and we are not all equal sized. Look at Blackburn compared to the University of Illinois. University of Illinois is at least 100 times larger at times than Blackburn College. And yet, 3 out of 2,000 of the members of the National Academy of Science are Blackburn grads. This really important scientific body provides scientific guidance to the United States government, which is to the United States. And so this is about the greatest scientific authority that I can point to in the world. And this is where we're pulling those definitions. Now, don't try to write these down. Furthermore, there's a document on the portal, the course portal, that you should download, and it is essentially this page. It's giving you the definitions of fact, law, hypothesis, theory. We're about to discuss these. It also gives you a reference to a book written by the National Academy of Sciences scientists, and you can get it for free, and that's where this is defined. And in that book, which is called Teaching About Evolution and the Nature of Science, because that's what I talked about Friday. These things are related. What is science? What does science do? And what does science tell us about evolution? Not what does everybody who has any idea ever, religions and non-religions, what do they think about how life has changed over time? What does the science tell us? This specific, really specific way of learning and understanding our world, the process of science. Well, that's the authority. And by the way, so back to this. If all of the colleges in the United States were equal sized, maybe one person would be from Blackburn. Given that most universities by far are, well, I would venture to say it's probably close to 99% of all universities are bigger than us, colleges and universities. So we are underrepresented. Our graduates are very few compared to the proportion of others. Somewhere around 100 times, you are about 100 times more likely to be in the National Academy of Sciences by going to Blackburn than just any other college or university. I calculated that one time because I got the number of people in the United States in college and looked at our proportions. But how about if I get back to the point? What is fact, law, hypothesis, theory? Fact, just something that's been repeatedly observed. Okay. I would venture this first point. Most people think facts are accepted without question. Facts are what we know at the time. What we think we know can change. And we just went through this on Friday, right? Water boils at 100 C. I think most of us would say yes. But as I pointed out, water doesn't boil at these temperatures at elevations higher than sea level. Yeah. So that fact about the temperatures of boiling water are changed. What are laws? Well, as I say here, they sound pretty important. I mean, what are laws in our United States and in Illinois? Certainly those are rules that we have to obey when we are interacting with each other, driving vehicles, all sorts of things. Well, laws here in science are descriptions. They're just descriptions. They're the way something works. Law of gravity, okay? And gravity changes. And it has to do, we think, interestingly, an explanation for gravity is not all that clear, but it looks like mass itself pulls on mass. Okay? So there's a law of gravity. Mendel had come up with laws of inheritance, how chromosomes behave and are sorted. Newton came up with laws of motion in physics. And so here's a really good way to understand laws. Laws describe how things happen, and they do so predictably. Why they happen is left to theories. So I'm really happy you have this recorded. I'm really happy that you have these definitions, and you can come back because this is really, really important. A mentor, as it says here, when we were going through and I was learning the process of science, I came in one time and was describing things that we had discovered or I had discovered and was sharing with them. And then I started speculating on why something happens. Why? And the professor looked at me as if I was a very young, naive scientist, which is exactly what I was. And he said, "Young man, in your whole career, you may one time answer a why question, but mostly your career will be spent with what's. What is happening? What's it look like?" And he was right. So here it is in simplicity. Laws describe and theories explain. Do descriptions become explanations? So you're looking at a road in front of Blackburn College, and you notice that in front of Blackburn College, the official entrance, that you can approach from the east and turn left and go north, or go straight to the Hardee's restaurant. And you could watch over and over and over, and you could describe whether or not people go left or straight. And after you've described, perhaps over the course of a day or a week or a month or a year, you've noticed that 1/3 turn left and 2/3 go straight. That's great. And now somebody says, "Yeah, but why?" If you continue to say, "Yeah, but 1/3 go left and 2/3 go straight," have you explained why people turn left less often than they go straight? No, you haven't. You've described. Theories explain. Theories say, "Oh, well, it turns out that," in whatever the explanation is, that if you go straight, you're more likely to be headed to Route 4, let's say. And if you go left, you're more likely to be headed on Route 108 because they head different places. Maybe that's the explanation. But this is important. Laws don't become theories. Descriptions do not become explanations, guys. Here's what happened. Yeah, but why did it happen? Some of you have played sports. And when you've played sports, you might watch film. And on film, you might notice what happened. And I'm going to guess that the coach or coaches will want to talk to you about why things happened, so that you can learn about the reasons that somebody did something and maybe rethink a strategy. So, descriptions don't become explanations. They're different things. Theories sometimes use laws, integrate facts, have all sort of hypotheses that have been tested. When it comes to a theory about human causes of climate change, we could ask questions like, well, do human beings produce greenhouse gases? Well, there's no question. You can go out and look at the exhaust coming off of an internal combustion engine, which is a gasoline engine. And what you'd notice is there's lots of CO2. So that seems to be a hypothesis, supports the idea that we are producing an unbelievable amount of CO2 into our atmosphere. But what about other greenhouse gases? For example, methane. Well, are we producing methane? Are we contributing to that? Absolutely. We do it when we're harvesting natural gas. We do it when we're burying our garbage and methane comes off. And we do it when we eat, well, we do it in the process of producing meat. And those of us that eat meat are contributing to the global climate change, to the warming planet, just like when we drive our cars or take public transportation. There are more efficient ways to move about and produce and have an impact that's smaller, and those are things I urge you to do. Theories are therefore integrating, just like a theory about climate change involving humans, are integrating then these kinds of tested hypotheses. And what gets generated are some of the most powerful and well-supported ideas, as you can see, in all of science. So you need to understand when we use the word theory in science, it's the most powerful thing in all of science. Now, sometimes, even scientists and even people around Blackburn will slip and make a mistake a little bit. That is, the mistake is how they're using the term. And they'll talk about people's ideas as theories. Personal opinions, sometimes we can call those a theory, an explanation, but those are not at all to be confused with scientific theories. Scientific theories are huge. And if you hear someone say that a scientific idea is only a theory, they're saying it is only the most well-established idea in all of science. Give some thought to that. Oh, that's just a theory. Oh, that is just something that is as well-founded as anything in science. What are examples? Cell theory, that all life is cellular and that all cells come from pre-existing cells. Heliocentric theory, maybe you know, maybe you don't. This is that the planets go around the sun. Germ theory, the idea that bacteria and viruses, fungi, single-celled eukaryotes cause disease. The idea that other life forms can cause disease. Here's one from Einstein, theory of relativity. Do you recall anyone saying, "Oh, that was just one of Einstein's theories. You know, it's not a big deal. It was just, that's just his theory." No. But you will hear them say that about evolution, and that's where I get a little bothered. Theory of inheritance, the whole idea that our genetics passes it along. Atomic theory is the foundation of your chemistry classes. Continental drift theory, the idea that the Earth's dry masses, especially that we see, are actually plates that drift around. Now, those plates also include parts that are under a lot of ocean, and so there are heavier plates that are under the ocean and lighter plates that are above water, and they're not just floating, but it generally happens that way. Continental drift theory, those ideas of plate tectonics, that we have plates moving around. And then finally, evolutionary theory. These, folks, form some of your classes for your bio major. I already told you there's an evolution class you'll take in a year. You have to take chemistry. This is genetics, it's required of everybody. Cell theory is cell biology that you have to take this coming fall. We don't have a geology class, but that would be heliocentric. Germ theory is microbiology, which is not required but strongly recommended. Theory of relativity you would learn about if you were taking physics. So these are the foundations of a scientific education, and they are theories. So again, a scientist could use theory in what they really mean as a hypothesis. And it's unfortunate because it's confusing. You should know that scientific theories are the best explanations we have in all of science. So we have a casual, and a formal way that we use the word theory. This is the kind of abuse that goes on, the kind of thing that makes us very, very unhappy as scientists. In 2002, long before he became Vice President of the United States, our recent Vice President, Mike Pence, said this on the Congressional Record, and so this is a direct quote. He's talking about evolution. "The truth is, it was always a theory, Mr. Speaker, and now that we've recognized evolution as a theory, I would simply and humbly ask, can we teach it as such, and can we also consider teaching other theories of the origin of species?" Well, there's a few things you'd want to say here. Yes, it's a scientific theory, and we do teach it as a scientific theory, but it turns out there are not other scientific theories on the origin of species. So I believe that he was confused about this issue. Just a theory. You might hear that. So Vice President Mike Pence, before he was Vice President, made such a comment. Here from that publication from the National Academy of Sciences, I told you it's titled Teaching About Evolution and the Nature of Science. And this is what they say from the National Academy of Sciences. Those who oppose and I'm going to read it to you, the teaching of evolution say that evolution should be taught as a theory, not as a fact. Those who oppose teaching evolution. The statement confuses the common use of these words. Theories don't turn into facts. Theories are the endpoints of science. They're as far as we can go. We have to adjust them as new things come to light because all scientific knowledge is tentative. But there's just not just a theory idea that's out there. And so in this sense, evolution is one of the strongest theories we have in science. But while we're talking about what scientists think, and this will be the last half of the lecture right here, what is the position of a scientist on questions that are unanswered? Or said in a different way, what do we think when we don't know? So, right now, we're trying to develop a vaccine for COVID for children, all the way down to maybe even a few months old, up to about the age of 5. And we're testing. And what just came out yesterday that I read, I haven't read all the scientific publications, but Pfizer was trying to test its vaccine on the youngest of children, and they weren't getting a good result. And it looked like what they speculated yesterday was they were being too careful. They used such a small dose that it wasn't enough to get the response they wanted. So what do we think right now when we don't know about that? Well, we think that it might be that we need a stronger dosage, but we really don't know for sure. Okay. In science, in general now, speaking generally, there are two possible answers to the question, what do we think when we don't know? Neutrality says, well, it might be this, it might be that, but right now I can't say. And so that's where we're at on the COVID vaccine for children. We're kind of neutral. We have an idea, but we don't really have a position yet because we haven't done the experiments. So in some cases of science, we have inklings. We have a rough idea of where we think we're going, but in fact, we just don't want to say yet. Okay, that's the neutrality. As it says here, on the individual level, this could also include a great deal of doubt. And then there's this other way of doing science. And in the other way of doing science, it is involving the null hypothesis. So if I have a hypothesis, let's say my hypothesis is like a jury trial and we ask if someone committed a crime, then the null hypothesis is to say they didn't commit a crime. If I want to know if a particular weed killer is hurting butterflies, so my hypothesis is weed killer Z is killing butterflies in central Illinois. The null hypothesis would be that weed killer Z is not killing butterflies in central Illinois. And in many cases, what do scientists think when we don't know? We accept the null hypothesis. And what we do is say, well, we don't think that's true. We don't have any real evidence to think that that's true. So we say that we don't think something's true until there's enough evidence to say that we do. And that's different than the null. Neutrality sounds more open-minded. Neutrality sounds like, well, we just got to wait and see. Null hypothesis, you need to understand, is a position in science for what we think when we don't know. Okay? So if there's not evidence for something, then we would say, no, we don't think that's true. We might be suspicious, but right now the default position is to say it's not true. So here you've got a definition of a hypothesis from the National Academy of Sciences. And one way to say it is it's a testable statement. Here, your textbook indicates it's an explanation on trial. That's a hypothesis. Okay? So, when you hear a hypothesis, are you neutral, or do you take the position that it's not true until proven the otherwise? And that's what we tend to do when we use statistics to show. Okay? So in most science, we accept the null hypothesis, and then we need to have enough statistics that overthrows that. Okay? And so we try to show that the null hypothesis is wrong. That's actually what we do in science. Okay? In a criminal court, we assume somebody's innocent. And the null hypothesis is that they didn't commit the crime, but we are conducting a trial, by the way. And then if we collect enough evidence, we reject the null and we say that this person is no longer not guilty. That's really what we say when we convict. So we don't really show a hypothesis is true. We show that it's not wrong. Isn't that weird? And we use statistics for this. So here's an example of null hypothesis testing in science. Does smoking cigarettes promote lung cancer? Now, no one is saying if you smoke cigarettes, you will get lung cancer. That's a misuse of science. Okay? That isn't the way biology works, guys. If you get vaccinated, can you still get a disease? Yes. And that's one of those misunderstandings that I was hearing this fall in our open forum, college forum, talking about COVID. Well, some people seem to be confused on that. We're talking about likelihood in science. We're talking about the odds that something will happen. If I told you that if you eat this or that and it's using a red food coloring and that makes you more likely to get cancer, I think then that you could use that information to choose to eat the form that doesn't have the red food coloring, if that's safer. So if I tell you if you smoke cigarettes, you're much more likely to get lung cancer, does it mean that everyone that smokes get lung cancer? No, that's not what I said. I said you're more likely. Okay. So what's the hypothesis? Smoking cigarettes increases the chance of developing lung cancer. What's the null hypothesis? And right now, if you're taking notes, try to write it down. So that's what I say right here. If somebody's near you, you can even consult with them. What's the null hypothesis? That's above. And you could pause right here just as well, because what's going to happen next is I'm going to show you what I think. Okay, here's what I think. Smoking cigarettes does not increase the chance of developing lung cancer. That's the null hypothesis. Then we do an experiment. We collect data. We see if the null hypothesis is wrong, and do we have enough evidence to show that we're going to toss the null hypothesis. And in fact, it does increase. Do we ever prove this, or do we gather evidence that suggests it's true? Well, we gather the evidence, guys. And so people that doubt these kinds of things can always say, well, it's not final. You guys aren't done. And this was done for over 20 years at the federal level. People who sold cigarettes went before Congress and convinced people in Congress not to pass laws making it more difficult to sell cigarettes. They convinced Congress that there wasn't enough science, that we always needed to do more experiments. In fact, we're never done. You reach a point doing these experiments, just like I told you with global warming and human causes, contributions to global warming. You reach a point at which you say, you know what, we have high confidence that these are causes and effects. So I have been making references to criminal courts. And you can see, and I'm going to run right through here. I'll go back. So right here, you can freeze this. I've already told you, when someone's on trial for something, we ask the question, the hypothesis is that they committed a crime. Null hypothesis, the assumption of innocence. You are presumed to be innocent when you enter a court for a trial. And that's what we think unless there's enough evidence to convict. And we just talked on Friday of what is that standard. And the standard is they're guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. And if the standard is not met, as I say right here, we do not find people to be innocent. Okay? We still accept the null. So, we don't say at the end of a trial somebody was found to be innocent. The word is acquitted. We use the word acquitted. Now, people will say this. We find them not guilty. But the truth is, we already thought they were not guilty. We haven't changed our mind. That's actually the way it should be phrased. So, in science, I asked you, what do we think when we don't know? And in science, right here, I'm telling you, we are more likely to use the null hypothesis when there seems to be no basis for something to be true. It's preposterous. It seems inconsistent with an awful lot of science. So, if you tell me you couldn't do your homework or send it in because Shrek was bothering you in his closet and kept making noise, why, I will first ask you, what do you mean by Shrek? Do you mean a cartoon character actually came to life and was in your closet? And if you say yes, then I'm going to fold my arms and I'm going to doubt and I'm going to assume the null hypothesis. No, I don't believe you. Okay. And so here's a fun little statement. Incredible claims require incredible evidence. If someone's claiming is true and it's really inconsistent with what we know, then we're going to need an awful lot of evidence. Well, what do we think about Bigfoot? That was fun. It suddenly took an interesting turn, didn't it? Well, maybe we're neutral on Bigfoot. Maybe some of us have seen some evidence for Bigfoot that we think, well, that's very interesting. It's consistent. You may not know that a professor of anthropology at Washington State University, where I got my PhD, named Dr. Grover Krantz, he was a friend of one of my mentors. Dr. Krantz, an anthropologist there, studied the evidence for Bigfoot. And I saw them. They were available in the library. He has footprint impressions, I believe from the 1960s, so quite a long time ago. And when you look at these massive footprints, and then he has the casts, plaster casts of those footprints, when you look at the footprints, they have like fingerprints. I don't know if you know that your toes have toe prints like you have fingerprints. The plaster casts show that there were in fact footprint fingerprints, if you want to put it that way, toe prints in the feet. He also had hair, but I'd like to hear more about the evidence on the hair and have it analyzed. Another thing to tell you about the footprint impressions is you could see that where the foot landed, the footprint was distorted by what they pushed against. So I don't know if you thought about that, but if you go to put your foot down on a beach and there's a big stone that you sort of step on, part of your footprint will be deformed by the stone that you step on. Part of your footprint will look like a regular footprint, another part will be deformed. That's what Dr. Krantz noticed as well. And again, anthropologists are studying human anatomy, know it very well, and they're very well qualified to interpret these things. So, was it an unbelievable fake that was done? Well, it was done before we had computers and all the printers and things and capacities we have now. So it is difficult for those of us that have seen these things to come up with another explanation other than a natural footprint. Now, that doesn't mean it is Bigfoot as we maybe hear it and see it and talked about, but it's something with a really big foot. So, maybe in science we are neutral about Bigfoot. Or maybe we simply accept the null hypothesis, that we take the position that this seems too preposterous. And parts of what's preposterous about Bigfoot I'm going to go for Pacific Northwest right now, which has got a lot of wild areas, especially the mountains in Idaho, actually, that aren't well traveled. There, it's possible that there are large animals that occasionally get seen, but small populations are hard to maintain. So, after a particularly bad winter or storm or fire, we would expect that, as rare as those things might be, it could wipe out the populations. So, what seems preposterous is that there could be a self sustaining population. Now, there's people with reports in Siberia and all kinds of other places around the world. I even had somebody try to convince me that just south of Carlinville, they thought there might be Bigfoot down there. The habitats and things just are not likely to be the case there. So it's hard to imagine as a zoologist that there's enough space and enough critters to maintain the population. So here in theory is an image of Bigfoot, and here's an image of Dr. Cran's book about Bigfoot or Sasquatch and providing evidence for that. And this is a kind of a model that he's come up with that allows him to imagine what it looks like. There are interesting things about this picture, I have to tell you. There's been people that have claimed that they faked it. But if you look at this, there's some things that are very, very interesting. I'll just mention this. First of all, the length of the arm. I don't know about you, but does your arm extend well, when you're standing up, well below your butt? And so look at the end of the hand and the arm down here, and as it swings, you can imagine that it would be pretty close to the knee. And maybe a human being's arm in some kind of suit could do that. The massiveness of the legs, these powerful thigh muscles here. Other things, there's shadows in the right spots. So down here, butt cheek kind of shadows, and over here, if you know about the quadriceps and the hamstrings, which are two major muscle groups of the leg, it creates a bit of a dimple in between. There's also a muscle that runs right here. Semitendinosus comes back on the back of the thigh and creates this line that comes over on the lateral side of the lower leg. I don't know if you've looked at your calves, but there's a bulging calf, your gastrocnemius, and then it has quite a constriction here at the bottom. Here's what I'm saying. I teach human anat and phys. When I look at where the shadows are, it properly reflects muscular groups. Okay, so now hear me out. If this is a rather loose-fitting suit that somebody's wearing and faked all of this, it's not going to show these kinds of proper shadows. If it's an unbelievably tight suit, it would show then these contours of the body, like a leotard or really tight sweatpants, not loose sweatpants. So whether leggings or something people are going to wear. So what I'm seeing right here is a skin that's very closely attached to the musculature, or a suit that somehow is really closely attached to the musculature. And I have to tell you, when I look at this picture, it seems to me that I don't know how it could have been faked, especially back then, but it very much cast the shadows in the right place. There's fur up here under the cheeks, and then not a lot of fur on the nose, and that's characteristic of what's going on with the great apes. And then, of course, you got to be able to see, so you're not going to have fur all the way covering up your eyes. Okay, so I don't know, just one picture, but in this picture, there's some consistency. So what would I say about Bigfoot? I'd say in some places of the world, there seems to be some evidence that is consistent with these kinds of ancient ape-like critters that at least were alive at the time that the evidence was collected. Okay, so would I say I think there's Bigfoot? No, that's not true. I would say I'm neutral. I'm saying there's some evidence to say that I'm neutral. It's not a null hypothesis for me. Now, what I want to do is end all of this lecture. So I'm coming right up in the end, and we're coming up a little short, so good. And tell you that we can apply these two positions to a big question, and that is, do you believe in a God or gods? So here's what I'm saying, guys. Not a personal position, but scientifically, Do you believe, do you scientifically, what is your position about a God or gods? And again, these have supernatural powers. What would scientists say? Well, remember, supernatural by definition is not something we think in science. Why? Because it's unpredictable, doesn't follow rules, doesn't make testable predictions, can't be shown to be wrong. Oh my gosh, this is a really, really good slide. So now day 2, talking about supernatural, to give you a summary of what is supernatural. Okay. So anything that uses supernatural explanations isn't science. We can't test them. And that's, of course, going to be important when we talk about evolution. So people who don't believe in God, that may take a scientific position, then could have one of these two scientific positions of neutrality or accepting the null. And we have terms generally that are used, although some people disagree on how to apply these terms and what they mean. But some people say they're agnostic. And that is, they don't believe in a God. They're a little bit more neutral about it. And other people might say they're an atheist. They don't believe in a God, and they accept the null. They don't think there's a God unless there's overwhelming evidence. By the way, sometimes people make a big fuss about whether or not they are agnostic or atheist. Please notice neither one believe in a God or gods. The question is going on. Well, then, was your position more neutral, or, and then this is often misconstrued. Some people say atheists have, without knowing, have a position that there isn't. And what I'm trying to say is, well, no, that's not really what they're saying. They're saying they're accepting the null hypothesis. They're saying, I don't believe in gods. I don't believe there is not a God or gods until the evidence comes in otherwise. And of course, you could have a position not in these two categories. I'm trying to say, what would a scientist say? So let me go back. So this is where I'm at, and this is why I'm happy to share. I'm a scientist, and I try to use the same thinking that I use in the laboratory in my personal life. I like to have evidence, and I like to think things are true. I do not ever use, and so this is what I've said in all my prior years, and I don't know that people understood what I was saying. I never use, to my knowledge, supernatural explanations in my life. So I simply don't find any comfort by using a supernatural explanation. I don't know what I gain from it. Sometimes there's comfort, right? So a supernatural explanation might be what happens to us, whatever it is that is us, after we die. Is there an afterlife of some sort? Is there some kind of consequence for our behavior on earth? Okay. I would say that those explanations of what happens after you die are supernatural. Okay. So do I think that there's an afterlife? No, I'm null hypothesis. I don't have any reason to think that that's true. Okay. Am I an atheist or an agnostic? I don't know. You got to decide whether or not I'm taking the neutral hypothesis or I'm accepting a null. But in either case, I'm not using faith. I'm not accepting something to be true without requiring evidence. So I'm an atheist or an agnostic, and an awful lot of scientists are. An awful lot of people in the United States are. You can look at various numbers that could say it's 20% or more, depending on how people answer survey questions. And so that brings us to our end of our look for the last 2 days then on the philosophy of science. Okay? And the next series of lectures that we're going to go on into continue looking a little bit about science, but we're going to go rather quickly. I'm going to make some other points about details. I am not going to talk about steps in a scientific method because that does not exist. I understand it's taught, but it doesn't exist. There are many ways to do science. We have rules, though. We have general logic to science, and that's what I want to share. For example, just to tease you here, in science, we like large sample sizes. So if we went out and tested and tried to find out what is the safest truck to drive into a wall at 35 miles an hour. Okay, head-on collision, 35 miles an hour, you hit a solid wall. We can go out and test trucks. But maybe the one truck we tested wasn't a good example. So we'd like to do more than one. And that's why in science we like sample sizes. If you want to know what squirrels are eating in Carlinville, you should go out and study more than one squirrel. Okay? So that's a principle about science, about that there's natural variation between individuals, and that if you want a good sense of what squirrels are doing in Carlinville, study a lot of squirrels. So these are methods that we use to study the natural world around us, both formally and informally. So I hope you've made it through this. By the start of Wednesday's lecture in our Google Meet, we will pick up then and further discuss a little bit these details about science. But for right now, I'm signing off.